By my count, which may not be, you may not have counted these this way, but by my count, around 50, my count says 50 of the 65 recommendations that you made can be implemented by the department without any legislative changes or additional appropriations. Does that sound about right to you?
Yes, sir. That does sound about right because a lot of my recommendations are to update or create policies and procedures or to reinforce certain policies and procedures. Those certainly do not require legislative fix nor approval by the board.
I think the remaining 15 focus on implementing proper training, acquiring necessary equipment, bolstering the department's intelligence unit. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And there may be some cost to that, but even in those areas, not this hearing about cost, but those areas, the cost is a cost that clearly is manageable and easily accessible, I believe, for the Capitol Police. What steps has the department taken to implement the 50 recommendations that don't require legislative action or further appropriation?
I just had a conversation with a member of the Capitol Police Board. They have formed a what they call board working group that's going to be focusing on not only my recommendations, but also General Andre's recommendations and your report, the Senate's report recommendations. They will be meeting. They think it's just, they've had 2 meetings so far. My discussion with the board member was that I will be included not so much in the meeting, but the after action to provide me with an update of where the department is heading to and kind of a time frame for where I would be able to start seeing some of the closures, the recommendations and where they're at. So the board has instituted a working group. It is up and running now as we speak. So that is one of the, and as well as we try to reach out to the department periodically to see where they're at with their recommendations.
Good. On that issue, do you feel like you've had the cooperation from the department, including the current leadership that you needed for your flash reports?
Yes, sir, absolutely. We have received full cooperation, and they've made themselves available whenever we requested an interview and or documents.
And you've looked at our report. I appreciate you saying that you completely concur with the recommendations and findings. Let me ask you about a couple of things just specifically to be sure we're concurring in the same area. One of our recommendations is to update the department's incident command system in order to designate who the incident commanders would be ahead of a large event, ensure better communication during the event, frontline and better communication during the event with frontline officers, and to require senior leaders to take over communication responsibilities if needed. Do you agree with that recommendation?
Yes, sir. In fact, we are in the midst of conducting our other flash report, the Command and Coordination Bureau, and I suspect that will probably also be one of our recommendations as well.
And you believe the department could implement this now if they wanted to, through your oversight group that's looking at it?
Yes, sir.
So would I be right in assuming that now can the department, can they move forward with any of these 50 recommendations, or do you think that's now has to go through the group that the police board has put together?
It's not so much that it has to go through the board for that process, that working group. That working group, I think, is to assist the department in moving forward and whatever, if there are recommendations that they may need assistance from the committees, that the board can assist them in that. But I also believe that it's the board is to kind of keep them on track, keep them moving forward. It was just recently last week that the department requested, I think, closure of 6 of our recommendations, about 6 recommendations for our second flash report. We did close 2 on relating to the first flash report. Those had to deal with basically updating the policies and procedures. So they are moving forward with our recommendations, and I believe that this working group will assist them in keeping that momentum going.
Well, I think momentum is important here, and it's been our view, both Senator Klobuchar's and mine, that so many of these things we now clearly have a sense of what we ought to do, and now we ought to be sure that we move forward as quickly as we can to make the changes. Do you believe that better command planning and communication on January 6th would have helped prevent the breach of the Capitol?
Certainly, the better planning, along with there's also a lot of elements, but training, proper equipment, but certainly the planning would have put the officers in a better position to succeed.
One of the recommendations of the joint report is for the Capitol Police to conduct joint training exercises with federal, state, and local partners on the command and control process during an emergency. Do you agree with that recommendation?
Yes, sir. When you are able to conduct joint exercises, joint training, not only with our federal partners, but one of our recommendations is that we need to be doing joint exercise within our own department, with our own different elements. That way everybody knows what they're doing, and we're taking a concerted, coordinated effort into whatever the situation or event calls for us to take action.
And on the idea of an event, one of the recommendations of the joint report is that the department-wide operational plan be in place for special events, that would be required. You agree with that?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Is important, do you think that a plan like that would have helped prevent the breach of the Capitol?
Yes, sir. I firmly believe having a coordinated effort and plan would help and put the officers in a better position.
My understanding that following January 6th, the Command and Coordination Bureau will be overseeing operational planning for special events. Have you seen any new directives from this bureau that would require department-wide operational plans for large events?
I don't believe I've seen that. I may be incorrect on the last. I'm trying to remember the most recent request for closure recommendations. I can get back with you, sir, to make sure that I'm correct on that. But I do know that they have started since the events creating an operational plan more robust or thorough than the previous one, and so there seems to be that they have moved towards that area.
My last question this round would be, one of our recommendations was that a civil disturbance unit be established as a permanent component and have dedicated officers as part of that unit. Do you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
General, your report indicated there were a few long-standing recommendations, namely realigning the containment emergency response team within the department's structure, requiring all officers to maintain a security clearance, and elevating all intelligence components of the department into an intelligence bureau. What do you think those weren't implemented?
There may be, I think some of that relates back to going back to the cultural change. Once again, we recommended, as you stated, that the CERT teams fall under Protective Services Bureau so they can better support the dignitary protective as well as other operations within the department. Again, I think that was a reluctance to change based on long-standing, long-term ways of doing business. So there's always going to be, people resist change.
Do you believe if these recommendations had been implemented before January 6th, it would have made a difference in how they responded?
That would be very difficult. We don't have a crystal ball, but I would certainly say it would have put us in a better position to succeed at that day.
You said earlier that you report to the police bureau, though we may want you to testify before our committee more than we have in the past, since it's your first day here and we have some responsibilities with the Capitol Police. But when you reported to the police board, did you report to them that these recommendations weren't followed?
Well, they do receive copies of whenever we close on our recommendations, and they are briefed by the department on the status of their recommendations.
Are you aware that they've ever encouraged the police Capitol Police to move forward with your recommendations?
Sir, I'm not aware of those, but those discussions
All right.
could very well have happened, but I'm not aware of them.
On January 6th, the heavier, less than lethal weapons like sting balls were never used. Do you know who gave the order not to use those and why?
My understanding is it was a deputy chief who's no longer with the department, had those more heavier munitions stand down and not to be utilized. Some of those munitions, my understanding too is, and through our report, that they were also expired munitions, as well as individuals hadn't been fully trained and recertified to utilize those munitions.
Well, so training, again, would have made a difference in what could happen there.
Yes, sir.
I have some more questions for the record, but the only question I think I have today, in terms of rethinking what the Capitol Police, how they view themselves, whether it's a security unit or a protective unit, are there jobs in the Capitol Police now that are done by uniformed officers that don't need to be done by uniformed officers? If we set up this new intelligence unit, does everybody we might recruit for that unit, for instance, have to become a trained Capitol Police officer, or are they part of the Capitol Police who focuses specifically on intelligence? Have you given thought to that?
Well, certainly, I think right now most of your intelligence bureau, your analysts, excuse me, are non-sworn officers. They are civilian. So there's certainly a lot of those positions and also in other agencies are civilianized. They're not like with the service special agents. There certainly should be a study, at least a look or discussion of some of the duties that Capitol Police undertake now could be, let's say, just for as an instance, think of it as more of a security officer as opposed to a sworn officer.
Mm-hmm. Or a parking officer or something
similar,
that would. Well, I think we ought to be thinking about that. We've just about worn out the Capitol Police Force, and I think we talk about adding more to the force. Our first big challenge is to fill the jobs we have, and in every police force in America, that's a problem right now. So we've got to be thinking, I think, smarter of how we use the trained and sworn officers we have. Thank you, Chairman. I have other questions for the record, but none today.